afterwards. You'll get sent a link. You'll notice that you're muted and your camera's switched off. This is so that we can obviously avoid disruptions in the meeting, and your camera's off to protect your privacy. Um, but you are very welcome to ask questions at any point, and we'll get onto questions at the end. I'll explain that in a second. So please ask questions using the chat function. It looks like a little bubble in your menu options if you can't see it. And please make sure, it should default to this anyway, but please make sure when you do ask your questions through the chat that you direct questions to DWT Communications. It should do that automatically so that you don't need to worry about it, but do just check that it's going to DWT Communications. If you happen to accidentally send questions elsewhere, I'm afraid they won't be asked because we want to make sure that everyone has a fair chance of asking questions. So send them through on the Zoom chat to DWT Communications, and then I'll curate the questions at the end. Um, in the unlikely event that we do get any kind of disruption to the internet or to Zoom, any kind of outage like that, we'll contact you by email afterwards and we'll set up a new date to reschedule the event. That seems very unlikely, but just to let you know in case it does. And finally, if you wish to enable a transcript of the meeting, you may do so in the menu bar at the bottom of your screen. If it doesn't appear, then just click on the last option, which is three dots in a line, and more options will appear. So please do enable a transcript function if you want to. So thanks a lot for bearing with us, and on to the main event. So as I say, it's an absolute delight to be here this evening talking to you about our temperate rainforests in Devon and what we're doing to restore more of them. We're going to have basically a talk of two halves and a Q&A. So I'm going to talk first off. I'm Nick Bruce White, Chief Executive of Devon Wildlife Trust. I'm going to talk first off around Devon's rainforests, what they are, why they're so important, and why we're restoring them here at Devon Wildlife Trust. And then my colleague Claire Inglis, who's our reserves officer with responsibility for Bowden Pillars, is going to talk in more detail about what we're doing specifically at our site in Bowden Pillars and some of the exciting plans we've got over coming weeks, months, and years there. And then, as I say, at the end, I'll curate a Q&A using those questions which you send through on the chat. So, and then we'll be done by 7 o'clock at the very latest. Right. So, when we think about rainforests, and I've used that word quite a few times already, most of you, or most people understandably, would quite rightly think about something like this. A place like the Amazon, perhaps, full of exotic birds and charismatic mammals and creepy crawlies and lush vegetation, and all the beautiful things you see in that image and more. And it's true that our tropical rainforests really are amazing places. If you ever had the privilege of going to one, they really are absolute biodiversity hotspots and the lungs of this planet Earth. But perhaps you didn't know, or maybe you did, having joined this talk, that here in parts of the UK, like in Devon, we have our very own rainforests, which in fact are even rarer than the tropical rainforests which hug our equator. Our rainforests, our temperate rainforests, cover only 1% of the world's surface, so they really are an incredibly rare habitat and an absolutely beautiful one, as I'm sure you'll agree from these photos here. So temperate rainforest is a globally rare habitat. It's found here in the British Isles, as I've said, but in a few other countries and parts of the world as well. So the Pacific Northwest of America and Canada, in Japan, New Zealand, Chile, for example. Also in areas I was fascinated to learn myself, only I didn't realize this myself till only a few months ago, but also in places that you might consider more arid or less likely to have temperate rainforest, like on the eastern fringes of the Black Sea in Turkey, or northern Iran or Azerbaijan on the Caspian Sea. So these are areas which are otherwise very arid, but the cooling effect of the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea in this case creates a permanent kind of moist, foggy conditions, which is ideal for temperate rainforests. So we get temperate rainforests in different parts around the world. And I actually first came across the term temperate rainforest nearly about 20 years ago or so. I was on a trip to the west coast of America and I visited Olympic National Park in Washington, which is an absolutely stunning place if anyone's had a chance to go. And those huge forests of western hemlock and Sitka spruce and big leaf maple are seriously impressive in the Pacific Northwest. But I had no idea at the time when I went there 20 years ago that back home we have woodlands of our own, which are just as mighty as these mighty kind of Pacific Northwest Sitka sprucelands. Now we sometimes call it Atlantic rainforest, Atlantic oak woodland, Celtic rainforest in the UK. And these temperate rainforests grow in areas which are strongly influenced by the sea. So our oceanic climate, particularly down the western flank of the UK, produces high humidity, regular rainfall, mild temperatures that remain relatively stable throughout the year. And they all create the absolute perfect conditions for the moisture-loving plants and lichens that temperate rainforests are known for. Indeed, actually, tw about 20%, a fifth of of Great Britain has the right climatic conditions for temperate rainforests. And as I say, you can see down there, it's mostly down the western flank of the UK. So although we may love to hate the British weather, and particularly when we go through those periods that we had in October of days and days and weeks of relentless rain, um, it's actually that climate, that oceanic climate that we so love and hate in this part of the world, that creates those fantastic conditions that meant that rainforests were once covering large parts of Wales, of Northern Ireland, the Isle of Man, Western Scotland, and northwest and southwest England. Um, but sadly, as these, excuse me, as these pictures show, in a very familiar tale, we've lost enormous tracts of our temperate rainforest over recent years through recent thousands of years through logging, through timber, through clearance for farming, through development, and even through pollution, because many of the species, the lichen species that grow in temperate rainforests are tremendously sensitive to air pollution. So now we've only got isolated fragments left in Great Britain, less than 1% of what was once there, in which case. Um, Now, before I move on, I should just say, actually, partly because of where these images came from, great credit should be given to a chap called Guy Shrubsole for raising awareness of this precious habitat and how much it's been lost. If you've not heard of Guy Shrubsole, he's an author who lives here in Devon, near Totnes himself. And his book, The Lost Rainforests of Great Britain, if you haven't read already, you simply must do. It's an absolutely fascinating, joyful, absolutely lucid read about our rainforests, why they're so special, and kind of rediscovering our passion for rainforests here in the UK. So I think much of what people know and appreciate around rainforests now has been born out of that book that Guy wrote a few years ago, sorry. So temperate rainforests are these wet, wonderful places full of life. Some of the tree species that grow in the UK's rainforests include familiar things like sessile oak, birch, rowan, holly, willow, hazel. And these woodlands often have open glades or rivers cutting through rocky gorges. But what makes temperate rainforest really special is the rich tapestry of life that grows on and around the trees. So we get these ferns, mosses, liverworts, lichens that seem to cover every surface from the ground through to boulders, crags, and even the trunks and the branches of trees themselves. It's a world of epiphytes, plants which grow on other plants, life growing on life, growing on life. And that's what really typifies temperate rainforest. Some of the really special species to look out for that that really symbolize temperate rainforest are things like tree lungwort, which is a large and leafy lichen, which needs very clean air to survive. And our rainforests are also home to globally rare species like this beautiful hazel gloves fungus on the right, which grows only on old hazel trees and looks like a bundle of rubbery orange fingers. Absolutely wonderful thing to see at this time of year. Um, and then on species and habitats aside, on the forest floor, the mild temperatures mean that all of that fallen and dead plant matter, which decomposes really, really slowly, creates a lovely carbon-rich soil. So temperate rainforests are also incredibly important carbon stores as well of soaking and locking up carbon into the future. And these places obviously attract incredibly rich insect life, which in turn attracts fantastic things like these migrant bird species that you'll be familiar with, hopefully, if you visit temperate rainforests in the spring, summer, like the pied flycatcher, like the redstart here at the bottom left. You might even be lucky enough to hear the beautiful call of a wood warbler, increasingly rare now, sadly, but there's still a few of them hanging on in Devon in our woodlands, or the drumming of a letter-spotted woodpecker. So absolutely critical places for some very rare and declining bird species. Also home to wonderful mammals like stoats, and in some places even red squirrels and pine martens. And I'm glad to say that thanks to the reintroduction project, which Devon Wildlife Trust has been leading, which got underway this summer, we now possibly even have pine martens in some temperate rainforests on Dartmoor already. We released pine martens from Scotland onto Dartmoor early this summer, and hopefully some of them are now scurrying away, enjoying the temperate rainforests of Dartmoor as we speak. Very exciting development. And finally, yeah, fantastic for insects as well, such as the silverwash fritillary butterfly or the ash black slug, one of the world's largest land slugs that lives right here in Devon. So whilst we might not have jaguars or macaws, I'm sure you'll agree that our rainforests are full of these wonderful charismatic species, which are just as beautiful, and many of which are in sharp decline, mirroring that loss in habitat on which they rely. Now, it should be said that Devon Wildlife Trust already has some fantastic temperate rainforest nature reserves already, some of the finest in the country, it must be said. So this is the Dart Valley in Dartmoor near Newbridge. We've also got sites at Blackadden and Dunsford on Dartmoor and Marsland on the north coast bordering Cornwall. So we're already here helping to look after what fantastic temperate rainforest we have in Devon. But it won't surprise you to hear that it's also a key strategic priority for us to create and restore more temperate rainforest. And given so much of the county has those right climatic conditions, those hyperoceanic conditions I spoke about earlier, which are right for creating rainforest, I think we've got a very significant responsibility here in Devon to bring back what's been lost over the centuries, and that's what Devon Wildlife Trust is trying to do. So it's not a quick or easy habitat to recreate, but it can be done. As you can imagine, scenes like this are not created in a day, in a week, a year, or even a century. It takes a long time to get there. And as such, nature restoration over that long period requires a really high degree of control and influence over the land. And that usually means, therefore, buying land, which is expensive. Um, so, what, therefore, is our strategy for acquiring land to create more temperate rainforest? How are we going to do this over such a long period of time? So this is where it's going to get a bit techie, but I think it's important to explain this because this is a really innovative aspect around temperate rainforest creation here in Devon and the Wildlife Trust more widely. So last year, the Wildlife Trust nationally developed an exciting UK-wide partnership with the company Aviva to fund the recreation of temperate rainforests through what's called the Woodland Carbon Code. So the Woodland Carbon Code is a high integrity, quality assured standard which businesses and organizations and companies can use to support woodland projects across the UK through purchasing what's called verifiable carbon credits, which assure that carbon removals, which are paid for, are real, they're durable, and they're additional to what might otherwise have already happened. Now that's important because carbon offsetting conventionally has been around for a long time, and it's all too often been used by big companies, sadly, to appease guilty consciences, so that basically companies can carry on doing what they do already, polluting and emitting as usual. So unfortunately, nearly all carbon offsetting has involved companies emitting carbon pollution first and then trying to draw it down from the atmosphere later, in many cases, much, much later. Now, we at the Wildlife Trust don't support any carbon credit scheme like that, which enables what's called mitigation avoidance, where a company basically only buys a credit, only buys carbon credits in order to balance off greenhouse gas emissions without actually making any significant effort to first reduce those emissions in the first place. But the good news is there are global standards in place now, like the Woodland Carbon Codes, which make a clear distinction, which show that offsets can be used responsibly, but at the end of a process of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, after every possible effort has been made to eliminate them first. And that's what Aviva's doing. So it's doing all it can to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions before then considering how it might offset. So the rainforest program that we've developed and what the Wildlife Trust with Aviva will basically create woodland carbon removals to balance off future, not current emissions. And these will only be counted once they actually exist. And that also gets around another problem where companies can tend to claim they've balanced their emissions already, but they're investing in projects which haven't yet created any removals, because obviously woodland creation doesn't actually start to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere until many years after it's established. So we're really satisfied that Aviva's shown it's taking real action to reduce its emissions. It's on a journey to commit to become net zero in its own operations by 2030. So the unavoidable emissions which carbon credits are being applied, which we've sold to Aviva, apply only beyond 2040. And they're restricted only to what's called its scope 3 emissions, so the emissions of the companies that Aviva work with, their supply chain and their wider investment portfolio, not emissions directly associated with Aviva's activities. And so from Aviva's perspective, investing in the Wildlife Trust to deliver on that carbon offsetting makes perfect sense, because our core charitable objective means that we'll manage these sites in perpetuity, we'll ensure these trees will be planted and not removed at a later date, and that they'll be carefully managed over the longer term. So in summary, it's all a bit techy, but the program that we've facilitated between the Wildlife Trust and Aviva means that whilst Aviva is able to offset its carbon emissions from beyond its supply chain, we'll be able to, sorry. So the program will facilitate Wildlife Trust in the temperate rainforest zone to create new woodland, which allows Aviva to offset its future carbon emissions from its supply chain beyond 2040. Apologies. And we're really hopeful this can become a pioneering model for companies to fund nature restoration at scale, whilst responsibly offsetting any residual future emissions that those companies cannot otherwise avoid. So that's a program that's come about that's helped fund large-scale temperate rainforest creation across the western flank of the UK. And so, armed with the support of that partnership last year, we at Devon Wildlife Trust began looking for places to create new rainforest across the county. And that's what led us, in a long story short, to the Bowden Pillars Future Community Benefit Society. So this is a community benefit society that has set itself up just outside Totnes. And it had and still has a fantastic vision for creating a sustainable community comprising a new regenerative village, living alongside nature-friendly food production and nature restoration. And those three things all working in harmony. So when 125 acres of farmland came up for sale last year, just outside Totnes, the Bowden Pillars Future Community Benefit Society raised the capital to purchase that land, in part through Devon Wildlife Trust acquiring a long lease from the Community Benefit Society of our 75 acres of steep sloping farmland in order to create temperate rainforest. Now I'll hand over to Claire shortly to go into that in more detail about what we're doing at Bowden Pillars, but it's worth labouring what's so great about this project and the partnership that Devon Wildlife Trust have with Bowden Pillars Future is that it's looking to integrate sustainable living, regenerative food production, and nature restoration across that wider landscape. Now, all too often, homes for people, food for people, and nature are all too often pitted against each other as incompatible enemies. You know, that the three things cannot coexist, but nothing could be further from the truth. We know that when it's done properly, nature can thrive alongside healthy communities. And so as plans for the wider Bowden Pillars futures develop, what we're looking forward to doing is really demonstrating and involving people in that journey of discovery where food production, people living, and nature restoration can all happen side by side. When we get onto the questions and answers later, should you have any questions about the wider Bowden Pillars Future project beyond DWT's rainforest restoration, I'm really delighted that Bowden Pillars Secretary Ian Haig will be on hand at the end when we have our Q&A session. So I'll introduce Ian later, but any questions you've got on the wider Bowden Pillars Future project, Ian will be happy to take later. So I'm going to hand you over to Claire now, who can now go into a bit more detail about what you've all been waiting to hear, which is our actual plans at Bowden and the fun stuff we've got lined up on site over coming weeks and years. Over to you, Claire.
Thanks, Nick, and hi everyone. Thanks so much for coming along to this online talk this evening. So I'm just going to share my screen. Bear with me. So just checking, Nick or anyone else from the team, can you see that okay?
I can, yep. You just need to get it onto presenter view.
Just pop it onto the slideshow. All good?
Yep, all good. Well done.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to be talking to you in more detail about our wonderful site, Bowden Pillars. And you can see here, this is what it looks like at the moment. A really beautiful location. Sits very close to Totnes. You can see Totnes in the background there. And then in the far distance, you can see Dartmoor National Park. So it really is a stone's throw from, one of our most special locations in the area. And yeah, just a fantastic, beautiful site, amazing views. So Nick was obviously talking about temperate rainforest and oceanic climate and zonation, and that's what this map is showing here. So over on the right, we've got the location of Bowden Pillars. So it's those three subcompartments outlined in a red tree. And you can see there how close it is to Totnes and the River Dart. And then over on the left-hand side, you've got a map of from the Lost Rainforests of Britain website. Fantastic collaboration there of data. And you can see there the different oceanic zoning, how Bowden Pillars fits into that. So if you can just follow the route of that thin black arrow, it kind of shows you rough location of where Bowden Pillars lies. So well within the oceanic zone. Again, as Nick has already outlined, that is an area that is defined by oceanicity, so proximity and influence of the sea, so mild year-round conditions, humidity, and also high levels of precipitation, high levels of rainfall. So those three things combined together are what gives us the perfect conditions for rainforest to establish and to be restored. So here you can see another map showing the outline of Bowden Pillars. So this is an aerial view from Google Maps. So this is pretty current. So the three red outlines there are the different subcompartments, which are all interlinked and adjacent to one another. You can see that there is extensive farmed land across the site. So this site has been farmed for a long old time. You can see the map here on the right-hand side. This is from the 1880s, I believe, and it's showing you there that these field boundaries have been in place for that long. And managed as intensive farmland. You've got some little pockets of woodland that have persisted, largely because they're in steeper areas of the site, probably quite difficult to have farmed previously. But yeah, so that's what the site looks like at the moment. So yeah, some big changes are going to be underway. But it just also helps to bring home, I think, just how good this site is as a location to restore part of our landscape that has been intensively farmed. It's a large-scale woodland creation project that's going to take place here, temperate rainforest creation project, and that is going to support the establishment of wildlife, restore wildlife to this site, and also incorporate elements of public access as well. So it's a really exciting project to be involved with. So this slide just outlines our key aims and ambitions for Bowden Pillars. So again, we've got some lovely shots of temperate rainforest, typical kind of species and visuals here. And I'll just go through what our kind of key aims and objectives are here. So our overarching ambition is to create diverse, resilient native woodland using local provenance trees that supports a wide range of species, both rare and generalist. Now, of course, we don't know how our environment is going to change over the next 100 years or hundreds of years. So all we can do is set things in motion in order to create as biodiverse and resilient woodland as possible. And that's what we're doing at Bowden Pillars. That is our overarching aim and objective. We want there to be recreational access and public engagement, but that which is appropriate in relation to the development of the habitat and wildlife establishment. So at the moment, Bowden Pillars doesn't have any public rights of way that run through the site, but there are adjacent and intersecting bridleways and a byway. However, we will be incorporating permissive access on the site, but at a level that is going to work in harmony with the establishment of that woodland and also the wildlife that will hopefully colonise there as well. We want Bowden Pillars to be an exemplar site for restoration. We want this to be a great example of how this can work well, but also to be a hub for research as well. And I'll talk a little bit later about some of the research projects that have already begun at Bowden pre-planting. So lots of exciting things on the agenda there. And finally, our Aviva targets. So Nick's already mentioned our connection with Aviva around the acquisition of this site. So we have targets that we will meet around engagement opportunities for the public, but also that carbon sequestration element as well. So just to talk to you about some of the work that's already taken place on site. So we've done a lot of initial consultation and baseline data collection. from when we first acquired the site through to the present. So initially, when we were first looking at the land holding, we met with Forestry Commission on site and conducted a site suitability assessment. So this essentially looks at the impact of woodland creation at this site. Is it going to impact any existing habitats or priority species that are already there? What kind of opportunities are there for us in terms of how we fund the work, how we pay for the woodland creation work itself, how can we incorporate public access, what can be done for species. So all of those things were assessed and analysed when we first were interested in this site. And we've been, having lots of conversations with local community, invested stakeholders, Bowden Pillars future, around our intentions here. And we actually held a launch event back at this initial stage. So I think that was last late spring or summer. So that was a very popular, well-attended event that outlined our intentions for the site and some exciting opportunities and what we were hoping, how we were hoping the temperate rainforest would develop. So that's, yeah, we've tried to kind of have those links from the offset here. We thought that was really, really important. We've also undertaken a number of baseline surveys. So these, just help to give us a kind of understanding of how the site is at the moment, pre-planting, what kind of wildlife is engaging with it as it stands, to ensure that anything that we do won't impact that and will only enhance it. So a number of kind of baseline key data to take on board are assessing the habitats that exist there. So that was part of a UK HAB survey that was undertaken for us by consultants. So that just looks a little bit more in depth at the different levels of habitat already on site and the quality of that. So largely is semi-improved grassland. There are some pockets of, I guess there'd be more copses than woodland really, because they're quite small in size. So we've got an image here in the middle, which shows an existing pocket of woodland. Beautiful ground flora in the spring, typical of ancient woodland. However, the high canopy is beech and the understory is sycamore. So at some point, it's probably been replanted with beech, and sycamore is getting in as part of the understory. So there are opportunities even to diversify that and to manage that in order to create a more resilient and interesting complex habitat. But it does show us that we do have seed source there for all of this wonderful ancient woodland ground flora, which we're hoping will continue to spread out into the adjacent planted areas. Also undertook breeding bird surveys. So again, kind of a lot of your typical species on site. We do have skylarks. So it's really, really lovely. And we hope as time goes on that more species will come and inhabit both the open ground and the wooded areas. Undertake soil analysis as well, and general historic environment checks and biodiversity checks, just to see kind of what historic records there were from on and around the site. So we've got some quite interesting things. So we know that the site was home at one point to white letter hair streaks and brown hair streaks, probably using the hedgerows there. Lots of bat species as well, particularly coming up from the edge of the dart. So all things that we hope to continue to promote. So here, these maps look quite complicated, but they're really interesting, helped to inform our design for our woodland planting. So over on the left-hand side, the map with lots of yellow dots. So this is showing us the existing standard trees on the site. So that's what those yellow dots are. Many of those are within the hedgerow. So there's a lot of oak, quite a bit of ash as well, a few Scots pine. And then the shaded areas are the existing copses and small areas of woodland that are either on the site or directly adjacent to the site. And then the map over on the right-hand side, this is how we worked out the best areas for natural colonisation of existing seed source. So those trees and shaded areas of woodland that we can see on the left. And also the areas that are less likely to see establishment of naturally colonising trees and shrubs. So they're the areas that we've essentially included to be planted in our mix. So that map has been incredibly useful to help with our woodland design. So the rule of thumb is a 50-meter buffer from your existing seed source for dispersal. So that's kind of what these blue kind of blobs are showing us on there. So we've got some good levels of regen, and actually on the ground, you can see saplings are starting to crop up already where the site has been allowed to relax, hasn't been grazed or cut for some time now. So that's really, really good news. And this is our planting maps, our overall woodland design. So it does look like quite a complicated map. So this was the map that we submitted as part of our England Woodland Creation offer, which underpins our funding for the site, which I'll talk about in a little bit more detail on the next slide. However, it's got a lot of things kind of added on there. So I'm not expecting you to kind of absorb every bit of information on this map, but it just helps to kind of give you an overview of the interesting mosaic that we're wanting to develop. So it's really important for wildlife establishment to create interesting, diverse habitats, to have this lovely mosaic of both planted, naturally colonizing or regenerating woodland, and also areas of open ground as well. So that's what we've got in this mix. So the different colors kind of represent those different areas. So all the P's are the planting areas. So there's 14 planting areas altogether. All of the R's are the natural colonization areas. So that's those areas on the previous map that were close to existing seed source. And then the OL stands for open land. So that's the proposed open areas. And essentially they capture the areas of the site with the kind of best views and also the kind of most sensible places to have a permissive path network as well. So they all interlink and yeah, should look wonderful as it's growing up. So we've got altogether 25 acres of planting in those P1 to P14 areas, and that will be undertaken across 2 winters. So we plant the trees in the winter when they're dormant to create less stress for them whilst they establish. So we'll be starting that off this winter and continuing in winter 25 to 2026. We've also got 25 acres of natural colonization as well. Natural colonization will always give you your most resilient seed source and should always be the primary focus, and planting always supplements that. So it's nice that we've got such a quantity of area to establish natural trees. And then 20 acres of open ground habitat as well within that mix. So there are existing small copses, so that's the darkest green areas. And as I said, that developing mosaic will really help to retain those beautiful views across to Totnes and to wider Dartmoor National Park. So over the next 3 years, we're going to include this permissive path network, which provides access directly to the town and across to the developing eco-village. There's going to be a lot of new fencing going in to help protect those saplings. So the main block of the site will be deer fenced with a rabbit net supplement. And then other areas which are very close to the road and to properties will have biodegradable alternative material tubes. So it's only going to be in 3 of the planting areas, and they're going to be we're going to be using mulch mats across the site as well to suppress any weedy competition around the base of the trees. We'll also have gated management and pedestrian access points throughout. And the hope is longer term to have a waymarked trail and lots of on-site interpretation. So things like welcome boards and explanation of the vision for the site and some nice visuals of how it might look. And key kind of furniture like benches and things so people can sit down and take in the views. So yeah, lots going on in that plan, but all very exciting. So over the last few months, we have been doing further extensive consultation. So lots of guided walks on site. I think I must have done about 7 or 8 guided walks now for various community groups, interested stakeholders. They've been open to the public to come and attend, and they've been really well attended. So we've had good numbers coming along to those. Lots of interesting questions asked. We've been able to kind of answer different queries, and hopefully people have really been able to visualize what the site will look like. And as I mentioned before, the UCO, the England Woodland Creation Offer, that is what is underpinning our capital work. So that's things like our tree planting, our fencing, our gates and access points, the kind of ongoing management of the trees as well. So really crucial to underpin our work and allow us the opportunity to do this. So we have also been entitled to some additional payments through that UCO grant scheme. We've got additional payments for low sensitivity land for woodland creation. So that essentially says that this land doesn't have any priority habitats that are going to be impacted by trees. Again, for nature recovery and ecosystem services, so we're bolstering those through our woodland creation work. Public benefits, because we're close to a settlement, we're close to Totnes, and we're providing access that's been recognised. And as I mentioned, we've got a contribution for 15 years towards ongoing maintenance and management of those trees to make sure that that young woodland establishes and is healthy and thriving. So some of the work that's been taking place over recent months, top left, we've got Bristol University staff and students. They were really eager to come out to site and do some soil sampling for us. So they're looking at both carbon levels in the soil pre-planting and then post-planting and then over longer intervals in the future. And they're also looking at nematode analysis. So that's the kind of intricate microfauna within the soil to see how that responds to the developing habitat. And this is the first time that this will be done on a temperate rainforest creation site. So really exciting, lots of interesting data is going to come of this, and hopefully it will be able to roll out to other sites in the project as well. Right, we've got a talk here for local landowners within the dark catchment. We're talking about Bowden Pillars and using it as a case study. We've had so much support from Forestry Commission and other organisations about our work here. Lots of interest in that. So fantastic, we're able to share our approaches. Bottom left, we've got the reserves team. So it's my colleagues at More Trees Nursery in Dartington. So they're providing us with the majority of our trees, and then a small number are coming from Tamar trees, so all very locally sourced. We're processing seeds there, so we've got some small leaf lime, and what was it, a rowan, I think, or hawthorn. I can't remember what the other seeds were we were processing. But yeah, really, really fun day doing that. And bottom right, we've got my wonderful colleague Jake on the tractor on the cut and collect, where we're starting to prep some of the planting areas, just taking off that thick thatch of grass and some of that coarse vegetation. So the planting is nice and straightforward, and there's not lots of competition for those trees. So planting does begin this winter. So excited. And just to give you a few more kind of stats on the planting work. So what we're looking to achieve is around 1,600 stems per hectare. So that's the number that we're aiming to ensure thrive in those planted areas. And within those 1,600 stems, 30% of those are going to be small woody trees and shrubs. And we'll design the planting in such a way that there will be a nice gradient habitat. So, for example, from an open area to a shrubby area to a high canopy, large tree establishment area, things such as oaks, etc. So it just creates that nice natural gradient for wildlife to establish. And then in natural colonisation areas, we're going for 100 stems per hectare as a minimum. So that's much less intensive kind of woodland establishment in those areas in terms of our UCO prescriptions. And those areas will grow probably at a much slower, more intricate rate than the planted areas, but that's going to give us this nice staggered habitat of varying height and structure, which is just going to be fantastic for wildlife. So the trees are going to be planted at variable spacing. So we don't want to create like a very old school grid-like fashion when we're planting our trees. You know, we're not growing them for timber or anything like that. So we want things to be variable, but the average will be about 2.5 meters between trees. And that variable spacing allows for natural pockets of areas of intense canopy and then areas that are slightly more open. And again, that just creates nice naturalistic habitat for wildlife. And visually, that will look much more naturalistic as well. We've got a really diverse native species mix. So it's just under 17,000 trees that we're planting. And within those, there are two species mixes across the site, and that suits the localized conditions of the areas they're being planted in. So the site sits on quite a steep slope. So areas at the bottom of that are quite boggy and waterlogged. There's some natural springs on site. So we're putting species in there that are much happier with their feet in water. And then other areas of the site on much higher ground, there'll be species that are much more tolerant to water runoff, for example. So there's 21 species in the mix, so we've got a really nice range, and it does include those species typical of temperate rainforest that Nick mentioned earlier. So things like your sessile oak, your downy birch, your alders, your willows, hawthorn, holly. So all of those kind of typical species that you would find in temperate rainforest will be on the site. And they are local provenance, seed source from registered plant healthy nurseries. We're doing our due diligence around biosecurity as well. There will be no plastic, there will be no pesticides. So the small number of tree shelters that we are using in those non-deer fenced areas are all biodegradable alternatives, and they will be reused where possible on other sites. And we will not be using pesticides to manage the weedy competing growth. We will be using mulch mats and mechanical means to go around those trees. So how can you get involved in this project? What kind of things have we got planned? Well, we've got an engagement and communications plan that's been put together. So that covers us for the first few years. It includes lots of different public events that we're hoping to put on site. Everything from bat safaris to bio blitzes. So that's where we go out in late spring, summer time to kind of look to see what wildlife is there, what can we record, can we get some more good data for the site? And there'll be a number of other things going on as well. Research underway. So I've already mentioned Bristol University, but we've also got a partnership with Woodland Trust at the site. So Sam Manning, who's the Temperate Rainforest Officer for the Southwest, will come along, and we've created plots for measuring humidity and developing canopy structure in our planted areas. So really important data from that. Also, the Royal Society of Wildlife Trust Carbon and Research Manager is coordinating responses at the moment to a funding bid for kind of further examples of potential research opportunities on the site. So I'm sure lots of interesting and innovative ideas will come from that, and we'll be more than willing to support those students and staff. There's going to be a number of volunteering opportunities that will come up at the site. So everything from site wardens to wildlife monitoring. And also, as time goes on, we will create a group, like a woodland work group, to help manage the woodland as it develops and grows. And just following on from that, we'll offer training for monitoring of key species. And that's something we'd like to do with the wider public as well, not just our volunteers. So, for example, there I've got a picture of brown hair streak butterfly. So we want to know if this species can be found at this site again. Is it going to utilise some of the existing hedgerows? We'll look for the eggs for that, and we can train people on how to do that. But there's plenty more we can get stuck in with there. And also do come and get involved with the planting days themselves. So we will be starting this winter. So our public planting day is on the 7th of December. And we'll be doing some communications around that soon. And then there will be ongoing opportunities to get involved with planting next year as well. So please do come and get involved with that. So I think that is my last slide now. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen.
Great. Thank you so
There we
much, Claire.
go.
That's fantastic. Thank you. And yeah, so exciting to think that planting will be underway any week now. So soon. It's amazing. Thank you. Right, if I could just ask Ian to turn his camera on as well now, and we'll spotlight myself, Claire, and Ian. Ian, as I mentioned earlier, is the secretary for Bowden Pillars Future Community Benefit Society, so he's kindly agreed to join us this evening. Should there be any questions around Bowden Pillars' future and the wider work that's happening across that partnership? But we're just going to spend the last 15 minutes or so now answering your questions. So, as I say, if you've got questions, do submit them via DWT Communications in the chat function in Zoom. I've got a couple here already, one which I'll take myself, and another one on pass, which I'll pass on to you in a minute, Claire. But the first question we've got in was a great one, saying, "Are there any other rainforests being regenerated or recreated in the UK? Will you collaborate with others?" So a very clear yes and yes. So the great thing around temperate rainforests over the last few years, and again, I'll credit, I think, in part Guy Shovsol's book in part for this, is that the excitement and the enthusiasm and the energy around temperate rainforest restoration is as high now as I've ever known it. So there are a number of other fantastic organisations out there, not only the 46 wildlife trusts across the UK, but the Woodland Trust, the RSPB, the National Trust, More Trees, who Claire mentioned, the national parks, various city councils, even who are all working incredibly hard to find land and plant trees to create brilliant new temperate rainforests. So yeah, we work very closely with those organisations, in particular the ones I just mentioned, through the Southwest Rainforest Alliance, which is a new alliance which has come together, basically trying to coordinate how and where we create new temperate rainforest in the Southwest and who's best to do that and how we coordinate our efforts. Um, Across the wider wildlife trust movement, I mentioned the Aviva Fund, which was set up last year to help pay for all of this. Well, I know a couple of examples where that fund's been applied in the last year or so. As a site in Snowdonia in North Wales near Dolgellau, which will shortly be work will shortly start on to create new temperate rainforests there. Then perhaps kind of the real headline one, which you may have noticed yourself a few months ago, was Skiddaw in the Lake District in Cumbria. So one of the really iconic climbs and fells of the Lake District has been acquired by Cumbria Wildlife Trust in order to rewild it and recreate temperate rainforest across what's currently a pretty denuded landscape there. So yeah, loads of examples out there, some fantastic ones in Scotland, in particular in the northwest of Scotland. But yeah, it's an exciting time. Lots been done on rainforest restoration. Question for you, Claire. How soon will the permissive paths be open to the public?
Yeah, so what we want to do is we want to get the woodland planting well underway before we start opening the site up and in those paths, because we want to ensure that the woodland is well established, that it's doing what it needs to do, that there's kind of minimal disturbance to that. So essentially, once we've got those capital works out of the way, we've put all of our fencing up as well, deer fencing and such, then we'll move on to paths. So it will be like the next thing on the agenda, essentially. So we need to do all of our planting over the next it's over the next 2 winters, and then there might potentially be, few replacements that might need doing the following winter. But essentially, over the next 2 years is when most of those capital works will be completed. So it will be within the short term future, but just not immediately.
Great, thank you, Claire. Um, Next question I'll take myself. It says, have you considered site expansion in the future if land becomes available? And that's a very straightforward yes. So the more land we could acquire to create temperate rainforest in the zone, the better. And particularly, as this question suggests, if it's adjacent to existing temperate rainforest or existing recreation sites. So the best thing you can always do ecologically is to make a good site bigger and more joined up. So yes, if land becomes available nearby, which is suitable for tree planting and for temperate rainforest creation, then absolutely we would do. Just mention that word land that's suitable. I mean, there's lots of things that come into land being suitable, the topography, the soils, the climate, as we've spoken about, obviously. But there's a good question here, which I'll speak to as well, which is another kind of point of suitability. And the question goes, the land you're planting up, was it species-rich meadow, which is also a threatened habitat? And that's a very good question because species-rich meadows and all sorts of other habitats that you might put trees on are important threatened habitats. Now, in this case, as Claire mentioned, no, it wasn't. It wasn't species-rich meadow. This was intensively managed farmland that had very little biodiversity value, sadly, beforehand. So the work we're taking can only improve it for biodiversity. But yeah, one of the things we look at very, very carefully is in tree planting schemes is the habitat already important in its own right, and will planting trees add to or potentially damage that habitat? So species-rich meadows or areas of grassland which are really important for fungi or waxcat, for example, we wouldn't create temperate rainforest on because it's already good habitat which needs looking after in its own right.
Can I just add
Um,
something in there,
yeah, yeah,
Nick?
yeah. Please do, Claire.
Thank you. Yeah, so the planted areas we will be basically the as part of the eco prescription, we do need to keep a minimum of like 10% open space in those. So we will be maintaining glades and kind of nice little pockets of open areas, but the open land where the permissive paths run through, we are going to be managing that for as rich species diversity as possible. So we will be doing like a cut and collect on the grass there to try and promote flora and associated invertebrates, etc. So there are opportunities for us to really enhance those open areas too.
Great, thank you, Claire. Um, I'll come to you for the next questions as well. I'll combine two questions in one. So first half goes, why not let the site rewild itself effectively? Why do we need to intervene? And I guess a builder question is, how will things like lichens and bryophytes appear? Will they need to be brought there manually, or will they find their own way there?
Yeah, so yeah, in terms of why don't we just leave the site as it is and let it do its thing? Well, we kind of have been doing that over the last year or so whilst we've been waiting for our woodland planting to get underway. And where the site has been intensively managed as farmland for a long, long time, uh, what's potentially in the seed bank there is quite limited for areas of the site. There's a lot of coarse vegetation, for example, docks and nettles and that kind of thing, and very thick dominant grassy sward as well, and it's of quite limited biodiversity value. So if we were to just leave that as is, then that would continue to persist, and we wouldn't have that wonderful diversity of flora and shrubs and trees that we're looking to promote there. So I mean, rewilding is an interesting term. I always like to think of restoring natural processes as the kind of key term and the key aim and ambition. Um, and that does require some kind of management and intervention. Um, and again, we've got the seed source around the site, in areas it's better than others, but that is again fairly limited. So we wouldn't necessarily see that wonderful diverse broadleaf woodland that we will through planting, but we have captured areas for natural colonization, and that will be monitored and we'll supplement those as needed. So all of that work will create this wonderful diverse habitat that will be really great for wildlife and for people. And the second part of the question, Nick, was
Um,
around.
yeah, lichens and bryophytes.
Oh yeah,
Do we have to bring them there ourselves, or will they find their own way there? And
yes.
if so, how?
So yeah, of course, these are species that may take a long, long time to kind of naturally develop and appear at the site. So many of those species will be associated with, say, dead and decaying wood, or from trees that have a certain age to them. So, there are some existing old trees at the site, wonderful old ancient ash, for example, on the site, which already has some interesting lichens on it. But yeah, they're not things that will just kind of appear in the short term. They're very much kind of will be representative of kind of that older growth woodland. However, there are potentially opportunities for translocation of species, and that's something we would definitely be kind of open to understanding more about and researching more about in relation to this site specifically. Everything will be informed by our wider aims and our management plan. So, we won't just be doing things kind of haphazardly. It will all be robustly kind of researched and informed. But where there are opportunities to work with other organisations and research bodies and potential to do exciting things like translocation, we're really open-minded about it and definitely look to those opportunities as much as we can.
Can I
Great.
just come in on that?
Yeah, please
Uh,
do, Ian.
because when Claire and Nick are talking about the site, they're mainly talking about the 75 acres of DWT. land that Devon Wildlife Trust is stewarding, just the other side of the bridleway. There's a couple of little copses of old broadleaf woodland which are within the rest of the Bowden Pillars project, and we've had several conversations already, Claire and I, about not about how to manage those and how to leave lots of good, only to take out dead trees if they're going to be a danger to the public, but to leave the rest in there, just so that in those bits of the Bowden Pillars land, we're also building up that wide biodiversity of invertebrates and fungi.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you, Ian. And whilst I got you on the camera, actually, I'll put the next question to you, actually. So, question goes, how will the eco-village and the nature-friendly farming interact with the Devon Wildlife Trust lands? I can obviously give an answer to that, but be interested to hear from you.
Well, I mean, that was just one example. I mean, the whole point is that as we develop the project overall, we continue to work together and talk to each other. That DWT have got lots of expertise in advising developers on how to make new housing developments fit in with nature. And it must be said, I guess that some of these are because the developers think they probably ought to. We're starting from a point where DWT are already our partners in this. So as we start to design the village, we want to be talking to them about wildlife corridors. We want to be talking to them about how we design the layout of the village so that it works for the wider range of species that are there. The farmland work starts from the same principle that if it's going to be regenerative agriculture, it's got to be regenerative for all of nature and not just for humans. There's a deep sort of ecological awareness in the project as a whole and in the core group and the people who are running it about our role in this, which is a certain humility for humans as being part of an ecosystem. And because we are the sort of top of the food chain species, it's our responsibility to make sure that our actions make things better for everything else, rather than make things worse for everything else or just keep them sustainable. Help that. So there's lots of practical things we could do. There's almost a sort of philosophical core at the heart of the project, which is about relating to wildlife and nature.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well said, Ian. Thank you.
We've got a lovely little sign up where I live that says, we are not defending nature, we're part of nature defending itself. That's where we start from.
That's a lovely phrase. Lovely phrase. I think time for just one more question, which I'll ask out and give a go myself. So, someone's asked, we have woodland along the Dart, but we would love to expand, but we don't have the resources. Does DWT engage in partnerships with private landowners? And again, a simple answer to that question, absolutely yes. A great deal of the work we do actually at DWT is with private landowners, as well as managing our own 60 odd nature reserves. We have a big team that interacts with farmers right the way across the county. And other landowners, helping them manage their lands in as nature friendly way as possible, and that includes tree planting and managing their own woodlands. So, absolutely yes, do get in touch with us, and we'd love to see if we can help you. And even if we can't, there are other great organisations out there like the Woodland Trust, who are very active in Dartmoor, who also do outreach work with private landowners as well. So yeah, absolutely, there are organisations out there wishing to help you. We've hit 7 o'clock. That's absolutely flown by. So I'm going to call it a night there. Thank you again, everyone, so very, very much for joining us late this evening. Special thank you to Claire for your wonderful talk and everything you're doing on site. It's very exciting to see that get underway in the coming weeks, and for Ian for joining as well to help answer some questions. Good to see you all. Yeah, thanks for joining. Do stay in touch. And as Claire says, there'll be some exciting kind of engagement and volunteering opportunities coming up over this winter. So do keep in touch. And if you want to see this talk again, or if you want to share it with your friends, please do go to our YouTube channel and you'll be able to do so soon after the talk. Thanks, everyone. Good night.